This is a pretty exciting one. My original plan was that we were just going to do this episode in only 6 words, but then we booked a guest that we need more than 6 words, at least 66 words, I would imagine. We've got podcasting king, comedy legend, Paul Scheer is here with us today.
Thank you for reading the way that I always tell people to introduce me.
Yeah, we had very strict instructions on how to introduce you.
I really appreciate it. And now, because I am a podcast king, you guys are, I'm going to crown you knights, whatever you want.
Sure.
You give yourself your own title. But, just so you know that you are welcome here.
I'm not greedy. I'll take a lordship. Like that's.
Yeah, you got it. It's done.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, I'm so excited to be here. I'm such a Weird Al fan, but I'm also a fan of this show.
Man.
We've talked in the past a little bit. And so, yeah, I'm excited to get into this. I don't want to jump anything. Just want you to know that I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate that so much.
Yeah.
We gave you the difficult decision of here's the songs that haven't been claimed yet for Even Worse. And you pretty much instantaneously were like six words long, please. That is the one I'm interested in.
I was so happy that you picked this song because honestly, for me, this is it feels to me like a dark horse candidate on this record, and I didn't think anyone was going to care about it. So yeah, what drew you to this song?
Well, look, I'm going to come in, I'm going to come in strong right away and say, I believe that this is the perfect synthesis of everything that Weird Al does, because a lot of his songs obviously are kind of these bold parodies, and then he has his own side songs that are kind of these fun, from Harvey the Wonder Hamster, these kind of uniquely weird, fun songs. But I kind of feel like this song, even though it's a cover of George Harrison's I Got My Mind Set on You, it is doing everything that he does. It's not only a parody of this song, but it's commenting on, I think, pop music in general, right? And it really is, in many ways, I'm not going to say it's an indictment of the pop music industry, but I do feel like it is one of the more pointed parodies that he has done.
Absolutely.
And it has this feeling of being a little bit weirder, and it still has the weird, goofy silliness to it.
Yeah.
So I feel like it hits every bracket kind of perfectly. And I think the best part about this is in the bigger sense, he's parodying George Harrison, who I would argue is a great songwriter.
Possibly one of the best songwriters of all time. Yeah.
And so for him to be commenting on this with him, it almost feels like a safer way to do it. It would feel mean if he was going after a one-hit wonder in a way, right?
Right.
There's a safety in going okay, we're parodying one of the greatest songwriters.
Yeah.
And I can kind of have this point of view, because I do think that that's one of the things that Weird Al is so good at, which is not being mean.
Yeah, well,
right.
So it's two things though, because he's parodying George Harrison, but George Harrison didn't write this song. This is a cover song from George Harrison from the 60s. The original song,
I didn't even know that.
The original song was by a guy named James Ray, and that was something that we've been talking about with this particular album. Is that with the exception of Fat, every parody on this album is a cover song, and how that has to be as much as we give credit to Weird Al as doing parody songs, as being a satirist. I think the thing that he's best at that he doesn't get credit for is actually being a commentator of pop culture at that moment. And I think that there's not an accident that he chose all covers that were big hits to kind of make a statement on how completely replicatable music has become, and
how devoid we are of new ideas.
Exactly. And
because it's really interesting, because sorry to cut you off, I'll just say one. When I was a kid, I was growing up at the same time that this George Harrison album came out. I had it on vinyl.
Yeah.
And that was the video that played on MTV that I loved to watch, because it was him in a room, and there was a jukebox, and there was if I believe, and now this is where I should have done all my research, but I think there was a funny version of the video, and then there was a straight version.
You're exactly right. It's so funny. And the funny version with him in the house with the stuff, this blew my mind because I never saw this video. That video apparently was directly inspired by Evil Dead 2. Which had just come out, and he's sitting in a house, and all of the appliances, the books are flying off the shelves, and the cuckoo clock is yelling at him, and it is directly, as if George Harrison couldn't be cooler. That blew my mind to see that for this.
So that's two music videos now that I know of that
And then
were
there's a more
directly
straight
inspired.
one of like these two kids at an arcade, just like singing the song to each other like a love song vibe. Yeah.
It's so interesting because, again, it's George Harrison, Beatles, but in the MTV generation. So I'm coming in, even I know the Beatles at this point, right? But I'm not going to lie and be like, oh, I was a huge Beatles fan as a child. I knew them, right? But I was a huge fan of this song. It was on MTV. Yeah. It felt cool. And it's interesting to be like, that's the song that's representative of that. And that album has kind of a fuck you vibe, the George Harrison album. Yeah. Like, there's an energy to it, just the way he's on the cover with the sunglasses and the wave behind him.
Even just naming it Cloud 9. Like, there's something really snarky about that.
It's true. It's true, yeah.
And I will say that just in my experience with George Harrison, I worked with the George Harrison's family on this new video that was just released a couple months ago. They made a video for
I remember
All
this.
Things Must Pass.
That's right, yeah. Right?
And it was really interesting talking to his family because his family was like, oh, George was very funny. And what he really didn't want to do was make comments on, like, he didn't want to stand too firmly in a political space. Like, he wanted to kind of like actions speak louder than words type of thing. Like, he didn't want to beat you over the head with it. Yeah. And I think that was like, and so part of the issue with this video and trying to get this thing off the ground was, how do we do something that is in the vibe of George Harrison, that feels like it's not preachy, but it feels like it's fun, it feels like it's engaging, it's innovative, it's different. Like, how do we embrace that? And again, it's interesting to see George Harrison, somebody who's gone through everything, even in the MTV generation, going like, oh yeah, I'm going to make something that's like Evil Dead. I'm going to also make something that's a straight love song. Like, and also at the end of it, one of the greatest songwriters, known for all these amazing original songs, getting his probably biggest hit of that time on an old, an old
cover,
like a deep cut cover too. It's not even like he's doing like an established beloved song. My uncles are in a wedding cover band up here in Philly that is like one of the most like well-respected Philly cover bands, and I did a round of like Weird Al songs. I'll name the song, you tell me what the Weird Al lyric change was type game with them on their podcast. And they didn't know that this was a cover. And these are like dudes whose entire career is like meticulously, like how George Harrison slipped under the radar with this is amazing to me.
Well, it's amazing. Like, there are these things, and I think we're getting more and more aware. I mean, the internet has made us so much smarter and dumber at the same time, because like, you used to be able to be like, if you found out that information, you were the keeper of it. Like, now you hit a couple hyperlinks and you're there, and like, but there is something about like, the joke I always say is, I didn't know that Under the Boardwalk was not a song that Bruce Willis wrote, because my first introduction to it was Bruce Willis's Return of Bruno album.
Yeah, great
and
album.
I was like, oh, this is his song, and did not realize that entire album was all covers. And again, I'm a kid. I'm just like, oh, this is cool. And it's how you.
What can't this guy do?
I'll have it like, hey, he's doing those Bartles and James commercials. This is great.
Yeah.
But it's like, did you ever? I reference this a lot. But there was this moment on Twitter, and not that Twitter is a defining moment of anything, but this is before Twitter had gone down the toilet. I'm still on it, but But there was this moment where Paul McCartney was playing with Kanye West. So again, take me like, let's go back to when that was.
I remember this.
And people were like, oh my God, who is this guy with Kanye?
Yeah.
Oh, Kanye's always finding these cool
Kanye
guys
breaking new talent. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like, it's amazing how quickly that goes. I mean, I remember there was a Billy Crystal joke on his stand-up album where his daughter was like, wait, you mean Paul McCartney was in a band before Wings? And it's like, there are these things that I watch my kids laughing at bits and jokes in these animated movies that they're watching. They're 8 and 6. And I was like, oh, that's a callback. Like, my son loves this cartoon called like, it's about like a rabbit adventurer. It's straight up Indiana Jones, like almost just a rip of Indiana Jones. He dresses like Indiana Jones. And he loves it so much. And I took him to see Indiana Jones. I think he did enjoy Indiana Jones, but it was at the same time, it's like, he doesn't, like, he's watching a copy of a copy of a copy.
Yeah.
And we're kind of talking about that here. This idea of like how this, how our world kind of gets repurposed. It's like the idea history repeats itself, but so does music and pop culture.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and to get even more like the idea of what made Al drawn to this, there's a couple really interesting things. One is that according to what I read at this point, so the important thing for this stat is we have to ignore Wings. Okay.
Yes.
But if we're ignoring
okay.
Wings, this song at the time this came out, George and Paul and John were all tied for having 2 number 1 singles in America solo.
Okay.
And this was the song that moved George above those other 2. Wow. This was his 3rd number 1 as a solo artist. It was his last number 1 as a solo artist, but this pushed him above those 2 as solo acts. And just to go one other interesting point, the original version, the 1962 version of this track, had more words. Sure. They actually reduced the amount of lyrics on the song.
That's amazing.
So if there's anything that Al is pointing at here and poking fun of, because again, there's something, it's the idea that this will come up later for Al. Like, we try not to, we like to look at it in the moment that this song was recorded and think of it chronologically, but this is the first song that gets released by Al that is directly, the joke is on the song he's parodying. He'll do it later with Smells Like Nirvana, and he'll do it with like Lady Gaga's Perform This Way. Like he'll cover certain songs where he'll talk about the person. We've talked before on the show, very early on, he did a song called It's Still Billy Joel to Me.
Yes, I remember that.
He makes fun of Billy Joel, and apparently young Weird Al, when it came time to release something, he couldn't do it. It made him too uncomfortable to release something that was that pointedly mean. But this is the first, and this is like, I guess you could debate how mean it is. It's a little mean. It's definitely.
I don't think it's mean to George Harrison.
Yeah.
I think it's more mean to what is pop culturally like we talked about this idea that George Harrison, released this album and he definly knew this was going to be the hit, right? Because he made 2 videos for it.
Oh yeah.
And there's something about like that Hit Factory world of like back, if we go back to like when I like when that moment of like Avril Lavigne and all these people like Ashley Simpson, people were just pooping out number 1 hits. It's like there is something here. Like I remember Rivers Cuomo is like, oh yeah, I can write a hit song. Every song I write could be a hit song.
Yes.
There's a chord progression. There's a thing.
Yeah, there's a formula to make it happen.
Yeah, and I do think that's. I mean, that's why I don't feel like it's mean to George Harrison. I feel like it is talking about like, why is this a hit?
Sure.
Why is that the one that's going out there? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
The lyrics are very clever as well at certain parts.
Yeah.
Like the part that makes me laugh the most is honestly, it's the last verse of the song before the chorus kicks back in. But he says, the song's got nothing to say. I'm recording it anyway, but I know if I put my mind to it, I can find a good rhyme here. It's the only part of the song that doesn't rhyme.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like, this is like, I do feel like that's that fun of Weird Al, which is he is, in my dealings with him, one of the nicest and funniest people, but also he is one of the people that keeps up with comedy.
Yeah.
Like he's not just sitting in a house totally checked out of something. And I think that like when you're surrounding yourself with good comedy, like he achieves that. And I mean, look, we've seen it with the movie too. Like he's not like, it would be very easy for him to be like a Dr. Demento type of figure now. Like, oh yes, he made those albums. I think it's a lot harder to do what he does now because what are hit songs?
Yeah.
Like it's so niche. Everything is niche. It's like, it's like it's a hit song to you, but I don't know that song. Like what are the songs that we're all singing? It's like, so maybe that's like one a year in a way. Like that's the song of the summer. It's like he can't do an album.
Oh no, there's a reason. Yeah, he pivoted away from albums because at a certain point he's like, I can't make something. By the time he's done making the parody, it's gone. Well, it's out of the culture. Yeah.
We've even talked about, I don't even think that so much, I mean, I think you're right. He stays up to date with what's happening in comedy and he shifts and moves with that. But the thing that I've been pulling away from, and I know Matt and I have talked about this before, watching these old Al TV episodes, especially the ones from like 84, 85, I think that Al indirectly is one of the biggest influences on what became like your guys' brand of comedy later on down the line.
100%.
Like you watch those first LTVs, those are state sketches. They're 100.
They were that like the dubbing. I used to do a thing with my dad. My parents are divorced, and every Friday my dad would pick me up. And one of the things I would go to his house for the weekend. And one of the things I would always try to do, I'd work up to this all week, was to make a radio show, right, for the car ride to my dad's house, which is only about like 30 minutes away.
Yeah.
And it was basically using those same Al techniques, taking like clips of interviews from Letterman or whatever, and like re-asking questions and making it funny. And it was so hard to do back then because I'm like on a tape deck, whatever, but yes, I mean, Weird Al, I was going to say this knowing I was coming on here, was my introduction to comedy, was my introduction to, I think, having a point of view in comedy. Like there's so few things as a kid, or at least when I was a kid growing up, that I could connect to. And I feel like what was presented to me at my time was Bill Cosby, Smothers Brothers. And that was my dad, like loved Smothers Brothers, but I remember really enjoying those albums. And then Weird Al, like those are my first kind of like, and then things started to creep in. But like as a young kid where you couldn't really see like dirty, like Eddie Murphy came in, Billy Crystal, all these other people that I love, Steve Martin. But that was a little bit older. Like my real introduction were these voices, and each one of them, Smothers Brothers are a perfect example of that too, of like really incisive takedown of society. And it's interesting to see that Weird Al like kind of walked this mainstream line, but I'm so impressed at what he did because I also remember he was a hit, but then everyone, the ripoff artists, were, and it's like, I mean, and the bad example is, I'm sure a lot of people will come down on me for this, but I'll say it anyway. It's Mad Magazine versus Cracked. It's like, Mad Magazine, I think, came from a much more comedy forward thing, and Cracked came from more of like, it's just weird and whatever, and there were things I liked about both. I got them both all the time, but Mad Magazine was, when you look at it, people talk about Mad Magazine, they go, "Oh, I remember that issue of Cracked." It's like, I mean,
I think Cracked really found its footing more as a website when it dug in. I
totally agree.
Yeah, like when they really dug their heels into being website content, they really established themselves.
They're like a companion to the Onion, or like or kind of more what the Onion used to do, and it's like, I'm all for Cracked now.
Absolutely,
It's funny because I literally today was having a conversation with another guy that I podcast with who had no clue who Tom Lear was. And I was like explaining to him in detail who Tom Lear was. And he's like, why do you know all of this? And it's like, when you love someone like Weird Al, you do all of the research of all of the people who were like definitive influences. And the stuff that we're talking about right now with the Al TV and the dubbing stuff, like Al figured out a way to do Dickie Goodman's bit in a video format and absolutely improved on what Dickie Goodman used to do. Like,
well, it's like, what I think is so funny too is, we're talking about this era where MTV was the cool thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And oddly, like Al does not fit into that, like, but he kind of does. And I think the thing that people forget about MTV, because I think it gets like tossed around, there's like, people always say like, oh, it's Capra-esque. And then I think when people say it's Capra-esque, they go, it's schmaltzy. And that's not Frank Capra. It's gotten like abused, and people go, "Oh, it's MTV," and they go, "That's Michael Bay." It's like, that's not all MTV was. I mean, it was like Headbangers Ball. It made room for that. It made room for like Yo MTV Raps, which was very different than what was going on at like the TRL level. And Weird Al fit in there, and I think it was like there was this thing that MTV had, which was like, we accept all weird, fun, cool things. Yeah. And to be like, oh, he's on at the same time, like the height of like that music is like coming alive, or you could watch a video for Weird Al, like that would be as exciting as watching Michael Jackson's newest video.
Yeah.
By the way, I know I've now referenced like 4 people that have all been canceled, but again,
this is something we have to deal with on this show for sure.
That's just life in comedy, right?
You're absolutely right. MTV definitely does not get enough appreciation nowadays for how important, or even a show like 120 Minutes, which was such a huge part of like alternative music getting played to a wide audience, arguably for the first time ever.
Yeah.
And putting Al TV in the middle of that, his bizarre form of sketch comedy, which also at that point, so many people had never seen anything like that on a television in their lives. The weird interviews and just the random sketches, fake commercials for products that don't exist, all that stuff was so wild.
I mean, and UHF was the perfect distillation of all
Exactly.
of it. You know,
Yeah.
I think when people talk about sketch movies, that's often forgotten about.
Totally.
Because it's like a Weird Al movie, but Weird Al was doing full sketch comedy.
Totally.
And it's the reason why at the end of the day, like, you'll see him on Mr. Show, you'll see him referenced in a way that is never, I don't know. I think that number one, he laughs at himself. So he'll put himself in different things.
Yeah.
But also people want to put him in things.
Yeah.
Like he, and I think that that's really, Naked Gun is a perfect example.
Yes.
Like he is, I just think it's rare to see somebody have such a sense of humor about themselves who is also very funny. And it's like, well, what, we're using you as a bit, but he also knows that he's a bit.
Yeah.
Like he also knows like what he is doing is that like, it's a very interesting thing. And it's going to his show a couple months ago here in LA. I was like, it was amazing to see the audience there and what people liked. And, that was a weird tour, not a weird tour. It was all the B-sides, all the
all the original material. Yeah, I saw the New York version of the show as well. But it is amazing and wonderful now to see, right, the incredible age range of everything from the littlest kids to people older than us. Like, it is amazing to see how much he has held on to people's
and my
hearts.
Kids still laugh. I play these songs for my kids and they laugh. And it's about it. But I will say that, and I know, sorry to get way off track.
No, that's what this show's about.
Yeah.
But like, there's something really great about, there's a different Weird Al for different people.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Like in there. And that's what I think is interesting. Like my kids will like certain things, but then they won't like the ones that maybe are a little more intricate. Like they're going to like Fat.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's like, I get what Fat is. They're going to eat it. Cause I get but then I try to play them like Mr. Frump and the Iron Lung. Yeah. And they're like, oh, that one's kind of like going over their head.
Yeah.
I feel it going over their head, but I'm like, oh, but that should be right in your wheelhouse. Cause it's so silly. It's interesting to see like he can bring you in different levels. And I think that the only benefit that I had as a kid, and probably that you both had too, was the top, like you hear these songs all the time. You're in your parents' car, you're in the grocery store. And so then when you heard the funny version of it, it automatically clicked. Like my kids have no connection to, like when I play them Taco Grande, like they don't like, they're not, they don't go, oh, well, right. I remember that artist. I forget,
that song has really been lost to time.
Yeah.
So there's two things that you've kind of spawned in my head while saying that. And like one thing is that I have to give Al credit. I know that there is this cliche that people go through in like middle school and high school where they know that they're like the weird, nerdy kid and they have this like brief period of time where they're trying desperately to not be that kid. They want to like fit in. And I never had that scenario. And I think it was because Al made me feel like, no, I'm all right. These are the people, like I'm fine as I am. I am daring to be stupid right now or whatever. But you've also acknowledged something that I didn't really, I just finished reading one of the many Mr. Rogers biographies. And they talk about how like, Mr. Rogers always got very frustrated at the way that he was parodied in pop culture because it was always so like overtly mean, or it was this huge juxtaposition of his character. Al, when I try to think about it, if you see even like on a kid's cartoon, if they're doing like a pastiche of Weird Al as a separate character, it's always so much with love versus like, I remember King of the Hill, there was Broccoli Head that was like clearly a parody on Carrot Top that was like a little bit more mean-spirited at like, oh, he just shows up and pull, like, I think every person who has succeeded in comedy has such a deep down love and respect for what Al has successfully done for 40 plus years that there's no way to be mean about it if you're going to make a reference to him now.
Yeah, it like we can kind of be like this dog eat dog world sometimes in comedy. It's like, well, you sold out or you did this or you did that. And I think that like part of it is staying power. And I'm always impressed. And I try for myself to always be watching whatever is new, right? Because the minute I had a meeting one time with a very famous comedy writer and director, legend. And still, I'm going to tell this story and still think of him as a legend. But we were talking about this idea. I said, "Oh, it'd be interesting if it was like a father and son dynamic here. You know, it's like the son doesn't want to follow in the father's footsteps." And he's like, "Nope, doesn't work. You can never do comedy about fathers and sons." And I was like, "Really?" And he was like, "No, it's just not. It's not. It just no."
Interesting.
And I think that that's completely wrong.
Yeah.
But more to the point, like, oh, you have a rule for what can happen and what can't happen, and I think what we've seen from all sketch, like, you know, if you go, like, everything's always morphing. It's like what Tim and Eric did on Adult Swim that then begot like something like Eric Andre. Like, those things are so wild, but also like a little bit to Jackass. And I think that like Human Giant came up at the same time as Tim and Eric, and we were doing something different in a sketch space that was not really done, you know, like, and it, like, I think it's always about what hasn't been done. How can we kind of bring this in? How can we kind of break a format? Like, how can we make something familiar and different?
Yeah.
And Al's done something really interesting, which is like, well, I mean, that's what it is. His whole brand of comedy is familiar but different, right? It's like, it may be in the same lane, but again, I think he's always kind of branching out. I think, you know, to me though, where he's his best is when it's not geared towards kids. Like Al TV on MTV was a great comedy show.
Yeah.
I think the Weird Al show, which was more of a Saturday morning cartoon show, felt to me a little more neutered. There were those segments in there that were fun and great, and I'm not slamming it. But I prefer the more edgy Al.
Yeah, when he's
you know?
playing in like an 80s PG and 90s PG-13 territory.
Yes.
Yeah. Totally.
It is wild to think about all that stuff, because you're right. I use Scream as like a perfect example of this, but like once you break a format, once you expose a format for what it is, it becomes impossible for anyone else to put that format back together ever again. Like, I genuinely don't think we will ever get a straightforward slasher film like the way that they were being pumped out in the 80s, because once Scream came around and pointed out every little like nuance and trope, it both was the best film of that genre and also murdered that genre simultaneously. And I think you see that when you do these, a show like Community really made it hard for any sitcom to realistically do a bottle episode again, or do any of these tropes that like we took for granted until a show actively was calling it out in the dialogue.
But then I go, this is, and I agree with you on one hand, but I'm also going to push back and say, I think who that affects more than anyone are the comedy writers.
Yeah.
Because people still want to see it. Like, and a perfect example is like what just happened this last month, which is Plane and Megan. Plane and Megan are two of the most straightforward, like they are like, we're unabashedly doing Child's Play, like, and we're amping it, but it is just to the bone. Like, it's not ironic. It's like, we're just, there are funny moments in it, but not like, it's not meta. Yeah. And then Plane the same way. And I mean, that's why I love Jerry Butler. But I mean, and I think that like John Wick works that way too. It's like, we want to, like, these things work.
Totally.
Because we want to see them. And I think that like the modern day sitcom has gotten completely screwed up, because the thing that we liked about them were like, yes, they were funny. Now they're like joke machines. Like, they're not like real people interacting. They're just basically like, I feel like they're guns just being loaded and fired. And fired. And it's like, you know, when you go back to like, I mean, again, I'm dating myself, but like Taxi or Seinfeld or Friends or, you know, Cheers, it was a show that just happened to be multicam. Multicam didn't have this idea, but then we get like so caught up in like, well, we need to make it like this and this and this. And you almost start to talk yourself out of like what people want to see, which is just, is it funny? Is it good? Then we like formula. We like, you know, it's not saying like, I think you can, all this to say, I still think you can be inventive and be formulaic
within the
at
formula.
The same time.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Like, I mean, you know, and I think that like, and sometimes people get too smart for that, but it's so fucking fulfilling to watch. It is.
It really is. Megan blew my mind how well received that was within the horror world, because I'm like, this is literally the plot of the Child's Play remake that everybody shat on. Beat for beat, it's
almost
the same movie.
It was a PG-13 version of it, which is, I guess, maybe that helped a little bit. But I also did think, and now I love it. Let's talk about Megan. How I do feel like people in the horror world especially felt like they were due for something lighter. Like horror has gotten so heavy over the last few years.
Well, become that A24 version of it where it's like, it's got to be a drama.
And horror
James
movies,
Wan, right?
Malignant. Yeah, exactly. Horror movies where people walk out of the theater going, interesting, instead of just like the jump scare fun. Malignant, Barbarian, all these that have come out recently that are very old school throwbacks.
Right. I've said it a million times that like Hereditary might be one of the best made horror movies that I've ever seen. But you give me an option between that or Sleepaway Camp, I'm putting on Sleepaway Camp every single time because I'm going to feel good after Sleepaway Camp.
Hereditary messed me up, and like I don't want to watch movies to like I'll watch a drama, but there is something fun about. I remember going with my wife to go see this Kate Hudson horror movie called Skeleton Key. I don't remember anything about it more than there's a couple jump scares in it. It's like, and that's what you kind of want to do sometimes. It's like I just want to see this, and I feel like action movies and we've gotten away from that, but I think that sometimes you can go to it. And to bring it all the way back to Al is he's kind of stayed that path. It's like, this is what I do. This is what is funny. And you'll get on board or you won't. But it's like the only thing that he's changed is the production of albums that he has put out. Yeah. And in a world in which albums don't sell, just make a single and it's cheaper and you probably will be better. And I'll support him in any which way I can. Yeah. I just feel like, but that's to me, like, I think a sign of a good artist too. It's like, well, the songs are different. Yeah. Like he doesn't have to change it up. He doesn't have to be cool. He doesn't have to be hip. And going back to what he was on MTV, he didn't change up his energy for MTV. It's like, and in a weird way, like he wasn't nerdy, if that makes sense. Like a cool person or, quote unquote cool person could like Weird Al, or you wouldn't be made fun of for liking Weird Al, I think, as a kid. Like you could buy, I remember the first two cassettes I ever had was Weird Al Yankovic in 3D and Huey Lewis Sports. And there was really no difference between it. Like, oh yes, those are two things that are good.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you like to laugh, geek out on music, and learn all about that band or artist who had that one song back in the day, but then seemed to fall off the face of the earth? If so, you need to subscribe to One Hit Thunder. Together with an array of interesting and hilarious guests, we do a weekly dive into one-hit wonders like Eiffel 65's Blue, Krayshawn's Gucci Gucci, EMF's Unbelievable, Delamitri's Roll to Me, Los Del Rio's Macarena, Musical Youth's Pass to Dutchie, and even Patrick Swayze's She's Like the Wind. So are you subscribed to One Hit Thunder or what? As Desiree would say, you gotta be. And as K7 would encourage, you gotta come, baby, come and join in on the fun of the One Hit Thunder podcast.
Yeah, we've said before, there's for a lot of people, there was this little window of from, maybe 10 to 12 or 13 or so where Al was cool. And then maybe when you get into high school, suddenly there's that moment where you feel like, ooh, should I be moving to Headbangers Ball over on MTV? Is that the cooler thing to do? But then a lot of people then get older and circle back and be like, no, wait, why did I ever think that I didn't like this?
Yeah.
This is great.
I still think one of the best questions we can ask ourselves on this show that we'll never have an answer to, but like Paul bringing up in 3D and Huey Lewis Sports, and what jumps to my mind is that we learned on this show that Al really wanted to release Midnight Star as the lead single on In 3D. He thought that was the hit. Wow. And it's like Midnight Star would fit at home on Huey Lewis Sports from a musical standpoint. How different would his career have been if that came out and was a hit, and Al could be known for the original songs on a mainstream level the way that the diehard fans know the original songs on that same level.
Well, it's so interesting. I feel like he, and this is what goes back to what is Al? And I think what has given him this giant staying power is simply that he has a strong point of view. Yeah. Anyone can say, it's a playground game, right? It's all right, well, what's this song that I heard, my butt is full of goo. My butt is, like that's a parody, right? Of like of the George Harrison song. I could make that is that funny or interesting? No, it's like bass.
Yeah.
And I feel like that to me is what he always achieves a grander level on. And I think the people that just write it off as like, oh, he's the parody guy. It's like, well, hold on.
Yeah.
Because there is this larger thing that he's doing. I'm always amazed at somebody who can do something mainstream, but also be subversive. I think that's Steve Martin. I think I do think that's the Smothers Brothers. No doubt that's why Steve Martin wrote for the Smothers Brothers. I mean, when you even look back at like, I remember reading an article that for Al TV, the cartoon one, not Al TV, the Weird Al show.
Yeah.
Like he was going to do a whole runner where he was going to play Luke Skywalker's like dumb brother. And they was going to insert himself into all the Star Wars movies, and George Lucas signed off on it, and Sir Alec Guinness signed off on it, but Mark Hamill's the only one who didn't sign off on it.
It sounds really
interesting.
weird for Mark to be the one to say no.
Wow.
I know. Well, look, different times, right?
Sure,
I mean,
yeah.
you know. And by the way, Mark, it was amazing in my experience. But you never know who heard it or whatever it was. But then you look a couple years later, and that's what Billy Crystal's doing at the Academy Awards, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, Billy Crystal!" Right? Yeah. But like and like Weird Al, like, and that whole idea of like inserting yourself into things like that was that's a Robert Zemeckis, Forrest Gump. I mean, different ideas, but it's like. He's like
rewriting history with the interviews and stuff.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I just think it's really they're all the same. They're all the same in a weird way. It's like he's subverting something and kind of highlighting something. But I think it's also coming from comedy first, not just a cheap laugh or a cheap gimmick.
Exactly.
Like, I think it's a thought out idea.
Yeah. And we've said before on this show how it's like because he's got the world of music and the world of comedy, and he's so in tune with both of them, it's just such an open space where he can do extremely subtle comedy, which arguably this song is a subtle, like this is a subtle piece of comedy.
Everything that we're saying while we haven't talked about the song perfectly explains why this song works.
This song is so great. Absolutely. Yeah. Because this is a real subtle track. Like, again, a kid is not going to fully appreciate the joke of this song and how
because it sounds... If you play this song and you're not listening to it, I mean, look, the beat is great. And look, we could all say that to Rudy Clark, obviously giant songwriter, it's like really.
And this song's produced by Jeff Lynne, who crushed it. Like, this is just a wonderful, wonderful pop song.
Yeah. And I think that's the benefit of, I think also, as we're talking about this song, a great song, you don't listen to the lyrics. John Daly, one of my favorite guys, so funny what he's doing in kind of the parody space. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if I would want to put him in that thing, but he always jokes about the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Like, look at the lyrics of Red Hot Chili Peppers. They make no sense.
Yeah.
No. But you like the beat, the song, and you're just like, oh, I like this. And when you really start to like pick it apart, it's nothing. There's no bones there. And that's what I think this song is also doing. It's saying there's nothing
That's
here.
Exactly.
We all like this song, but there's nothing.
That's exactly
here.
What I was going to say. It's perfect because I'm the same way. Like I'm just such a sucker for a melody and production. Like you don't notice the lyrics. In the original version of this song, apparently there are 42 unique words that George Harrison used. Al's version has 99.
Wow.
But there are only 42 actual words in the song. But because it's such a bop, you just don't notice. It flies by. It doesn't occur to you at all that it's so incredibly threadbare. Lyrically,
well, I think
anyway.
that as I am like you in the sense that I'm pulled in by the music, and then oftentimes someone will say, "Oh, that means this or that." Oh, and then when you really go for a deep dive, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I missed all that," because I'm just like I'm more connected to the melody and stuff like that. So it is. I do think that this is going back to the beginning. It's like this is why this album is so, or this track is so interesting.
Yeah,
because it is really, it's an encapsulation of a career in a song. It kind of underlines everything that he's saying and doing.
Totally.
And it also, I think it answers why his stuff became hits as well.
Yeah.
Like, it's like,
for sure.
It's really smart. I have this album. I have to like burn it because it's on CD and it's Van Morrison. He had to cancel an album contract. Right. And so the only way you can cancel the album contract is recording like 65 original songs, and he did it all in one session.
I know about this
album.
All
are about like, they're all about like 90, like they're about like 90 seconds to 2.5 minutes long or whatever it is. And they all are like, my hat, I wear my hat on my head. I love my hat. Okay. And so he like technically fulfilled his contract by doing like these songs.
Yeah.
I always think about that too. It's like it's unreleasable, but it also is like, it's like you can go either way with like how much you put into something or not.
This is another song, like we like to talk about his recurring themes in his music, and Al also loves to poke fun at the intersection of art and commerce and the money that is in play. We talked about that to bring it back to our good friend Mark Hamill. That's a joke he makes in Yoda as well, about all the money that gets involved in the making of these songs, like how much money is on the table in the making of this art. And that is another thing that comes back more and more as it goes along. But yeah, no, there's so much in this. Again, hilarious how much is baked into this song that is talking about how few words are in it, and yet there's a tremendous amount of underlying meaning in this track.
And with you said 99 words are in the song.
99 unique words, yeah.
Yeah, 99 unique words. It's just going back to that idea, like, he doesn't have to hit you over the head with it. Like it's like, and also the repetition of it also does the job, right? Like the repetition of it, like tells you the story. I just think this track is such an interesting one because it's the progression of the song, like the beat of the song could have been anything.
Yeah.
But I do think you're right in saying that like this album is talking about where music is at this point, right? What is music? What are we listening to? Who's getting hits? Why are they getting hits?
The album is called Even Worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's like that. Yeah. And it's like,
which obviously is a play on bad, but still, I mean, it's like, it's there. Yeah.
But I mean, it's also, and then that's a funny thing too. The album is called Bad, right?
Yeah,
like,
true.
It's like, and I think that there is something really interesting about like this idea that, I think maybe I'm reading in too deeply, but to go back to the beginning, like we were saying, like if people's only introduction to George Harrison is this song, because there's a number one hit from George Harrison, like what are they missing out on? How much are they missing out on?
Totally.
And I think that like you see that with people who'd ever watch a Sean Connery Bond, or, it's like, though that's in the past. And I think that we've increasingly, with the internet and the amount of content that has gone out there, I have to say content, you forget to go backwards.
Yeah.
It's rare to go backwards.
The last time I saw Matt in person, we had a very lengthy conversation about like, I am very much the laid back person who will let people live their life at their own pace. But one of the few things that truly gets under my skin as someone who works a lot with like high schoolers is people who have this idea of like, well, if it was made before I was born, then it's not worthwhile. And it is just the most, it's almost like it hurts my soul, because it's like part of my growth was my dad showing me something like Caddyshack, which was before my time, or like just being introduced to these things that even if they didn't age well, it helped me build this roadmap of the history of things and like the history of comedy and the evolution of this, and learning to like look at like, wow, National Lampoon doesn't get nearly enough credit for how it completely, there is like this, it's like the Citizen Kane of comedy. There's this complete divide on what comedy was before National Lampoon came out and what it was after it, and it was like never the same after that moment. Like,
I totally agree with you. I think that like, I always thank my dad for introducing me to the Marx Brothers.
Yeah.
Right. Like, because it's sort of like, oh, like my attitude as a kid was, it's black and white. I don't want to see a black and white movie. And then it's like, oh, it's funny. And like, I may not have watched the Treasure of Sierra Madre with the same enthusiasm, but it's like, well, find that thing. I know for me, I am always trying to introduce my kids to things. Like this past weekend, I brought them to see Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like I said, 35 millimeter
awesome
at the New Bev out here, which by the way, I have to say was shocking because it looked so bad. Like I was
really?
like it was. I mean, I was having fun, but I was like, you can't see a goddamn thing. Like I came home and I came home and was rewatching certain scenes. I was like, oh, you can see faces here. Like, it's like it's all cut together, different pieces. Like some scenes are really light, some scenes are really dark.
Oh, that's funny.
But because it's not a restored cut. It's just like this is a 30. It's like, again, great to watch.
Yeah,
really
of
fun.
course.
But I'm always trying to find like, I don't want to like inundate them, but I want to walk them into things. Like I showed them E.T. They loved E.T. And I had this conversation with, not to name drop here, but with David Lowery, who is this amazing director, did The Green Knight and so much great stuff. But we were talking about what these movies did for us as kids. And I think a lot of the things like they did was they gave us an emotional base. Like E.T., like I cried. There was trauma there. Goonies, like I'm seeing kids put in danger. Like I'm afraid, even things like Home Alone, right? And we don't do that anymore with these kids movies. They're all kind of safe and sanitized in a weird way. And conversely, like the comedy was a little bit more, they were things that were like making us learn, like what's our comedic voice? What's this? And I think, we have things like SpongeBob SquarePants or Loud House or these cartoons that are like legitimately funny, but there's, for every 2 or 3 great comedy things, there's like 45 just crappy things.
Throwaway
no
jokes.
offense to Paw Patrol, but it's like, they're not even trying. At least the Saturday morning cartoons, I could say like, Scooby-Doo had like some energy to it. I don't know. I guess it's sort
weird
of like
to think of Paw Patrol coming out at the exact same time that something like Gravity Falls is coming out, right? Where it's you couldn't have like 2 bipolar opposites of a show of like what it invokes in you emotionally.
So true.
And it's like, and that stuff I think messes up our kids because like Weird Al Yankovic is the generation of people coming up. Like, where are their points of view coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can tell you, my point of view is coming from watching Saturday Night Live, watching these things. It's like that. We're a little less sanitized or a little, it's like, and I just feel like I'm watching my kids and I'm like, well, you're 8 years old. At 8 years old, I was into all this other stuff and I was doing all this. And it's like, and I don't want to be like old man, like, oh, well, at my age, but I'm like, but I also just don't see them being exposed to things that are as challenging. So as a dad, I'm always trying to bring in things that are like, here, listen to Weird Al, like just find something that you find is funny. Let's scratch that itch, because it's like if left to their own devices and everything in the now, they're not going to find it.
It is. So I just had a friend over this weekend who brought their 8-year-old, and I had never met their 8-year-old until they brought them over. I was having a bad horror movie night with a bunch of friends.
Oh, fun.
And they're like, he'll be fine. He's going to play on his Switch. He might ask to watch some TV. So he did ask me to put on the TV. And what blew my mind was this 8-year-old wanted to watch Dragon Ball Super, not Dragon Ball Z. He wanted to watch Dragon Ball Super.
Yep.
And he did not want me to put the dubbed version on. He's like, I need to watch the original Japanese subtitles.
Wow.
Dragon Ball. And I'm like, yo, this kid is wild.
Yeah, that is amazing. But that's what you want. Like, you want,
totally.
That's what you want, that weirdness. I think that like also like weirdness, nerdydom, or whatever it is like has changed, because now like there's a niche for everybody. Whatever you're into, like you'll find a huge community of people who are into it, and if they're not, like, you're not weird. Like no one's weird anymore.
Yeah.
It's like there's no outside interest, because there's something for everybody, which is good and bad. I don't know. It's like,
it's true.
All right. Well,
there's a fortitude to feeling like an outcast, like to feeling like, oh, I have this.
Agreed.
This is my
Totally
thing.
agreed.
Yeah.
Totally agreed. Yeah.
Well, this was a phenomenal conversation for sure. It's time, however, for us to do some quick rankings here.
We're going to do some quick rankings really quick. Before we do the rankings, I just wanted to point out 2 quick things that I didn't get to, which is, one is that I love that the name of this song is "This Song's Just 6 Words Long," but clearly every chorus he sings "This song is just 6 words long," which makes 7 words. He's following the structure of George Harrison's, but I just love that little joke. Like, even in the title, there's 7 words.
That's great.
Just to go back to Al and George for one moment, there is a great clip. We can post it on our socials, Matt, but there's footage of Al performing at George Fest, a tribute to George Harrison in 2014. And Al gets on stage with Danny Harrison and this like all-star band and sings "What Is Life?" And it is like tears move. It is beautiful. It is just Al doing a straight cover of George Harrison's "What Is Life?" It is fantastic. So there's no, again, talking about like how, again, I agree with you, Paul. I don't think this song is at all mean to George. It's more of a grander pop culture thing. But if there was any doubt about Al's George Harrison fandom, it's very clearly on display there. It's really very special to see. So I wanted to plug.
And by the way,
2.
can I also say that I imagine, but maybe I'm wrong. I know they had to go to everybody to get their rights to do this, and they famously not getting Prince to sign off and stuff. I imagine he had to go to George Harrison, right?
I think he
to
would
get this
have
arrangement.
Yeah, because there is a different arrangement on this. Yeah, he would have. And funny enough, the one other little bit of post history, way, way, way back, the very first cease and desist Al ever got was when he did a parody of Taxman called Pac-Man,
wow.
which Dr. Demento played like 3 times before he got a cease and desist from the Beatles people. And they had to cut it
wow.
entirely. And
Is this
Al,
the only time that he successfully got an okay from the Beatles, honestly? Because hasn't
From
he like
any-
famously been turned down by Paul?
he got
on,
turned
like,
down
2
by
or 3
Paul.
times?
I don't know if he ever tried anything by John, but yes, he did get turned down by Paul.
He got turned down by Yoko. He wanted to do a Free as a Bird parody, but that was technically a John song. So Paul said that they were fine with it, but Yoko needed to sign off on it.
Yes.
And she gave him a no.
And Paul said no to Live and Let Die turned into chicken pot pie. So this, I think you're right. Eventually he got the rights to Pac-Man, and it came out on a compilation just a few years ago. This very old recording of Pac-Man that he did when he was still like on a 4-track in his living room. That was extra complicated because apparently he had to get permission from both the Beatles and Namco, who own Pac-Man. It was a very complicated situation.
Hilarious.
This is a Yoda situation all
I know
over
Yoda
again.
was another rights nightmare for him. It took him years to get that. Anyway, yes, no, sorry. We can definitely do our rankings now. Let's do it.
Well, I will say that too, like, that I could imagine that George Harrison, from what I know of George Harrison, enjoyed the hell out of this.
Oh,
song.
yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, that's the other thing too. It's like what George Harrison was doing was kind of doing what it's
Totally.
Well, George was funding the Monty
like
Python
two people
movies at one
parodying
point,
the
right?
same thing in different ways, and it's like, whoa, like that, it's super meta,
Super
you know,
meta.
and that,
Super
yeah,
meta.
and I love that.
Totally.
All right, Matt, real quick. I am dropping mine pretty high up here. I'm putting it in between Like a Surgeon and Ricky on the best parodies list so far. So right now, that's in the 4 spot, or the 5 spot at this point on the album.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. And I'm going to put mine. Yeah, I'm ranking this high as well. Again, this is like, in terms of Al's clever parodies and just the clever conceit of the parody, this is one of the smartest songs he has done up until this point in his career, I really think. And in fact, I'm going to put it in between 2 of the heaviest hitters of Al parodies that there are, which is I'm going to put it right in between Fat and Eat It.
Wow. All right. Also in the top 5. Now, Paul, we sent you the list here of every time we've had a guest, they've been able to rank their pick against everyone else's guest pick.
Right.
So you've got the list. You can tell us where you want to put this song is just 6 words long on that list. And
I've been looking at this list, and I have to say that, it's a tricky thing to put. I think I'm really wrestling with. I'm going to put it in the 3rd spot.
okay.
I'm gonna put it in the 3rd spot because I don't want to be too aggressive and upset the apple cart. It's like One More Minute and Yoda are the first 2.
Yeah.
Although I don't know if I would put them in my,
Speaking of upsetting the apple cart, the other thing you get to do is, if you would like to,
Is upset the apple cart.
Upset the apple cart. You can take one song on this list and you can move it somewhere else if you think it's in the wrong place. If there's something you think is too high or too low and you want to shift something, it's like a little version of White Elephant our guests get to play.
Well, look, I'm looking at this list, and I have to say, I got a lot of personal issues with this guest rank.
Everybody does. Everybody does.
And I have to say that, I wonder where it is, like the connection to certain things. I famously, I got to tell Weird Al this story that my parents became born again Christians at one point, and Weird Al in 3D was an album that was on like the do not listen to list for our
Nature
church.
Trail to Hell.
And Nature Trail to Hell was that.
Yeah.
That was the reason why. And I got to tell him that like my parents made me just throw out my Weird Al album. So that song does have like a thing. I think when you're balancing originals and parodies, this to me feels like it encapsulates everything. I've put it. I'm very happy to put it there. I kind of feel like, you know what? I'm going to say number 2. I'm going to put in the number 2 above Yoda, because I also think like Yoda is like, I don't know if Yoda's is much of an indictment of what he does. I don't know. I also don't feel like I'm that familiar with One More Minute. I got to hear it. But all right, I'm going to take one off on here and or move it down or around. I am going to, you know what? Because I told that story, I'm going to move up Nature Trail to Hell a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm going to move it above Christmas at Ground Zero.
Good
So
call.
I'm gonna get. Yeah, I like that song, and I think it's a fun, weird one. And I think that's like those are, I gotta. It's it's a tough battle with these Weird Al songs.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like, oh, I do like living with a hernia. But should it be that high? I don't know. I'm wrestling with all of
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
Love it. Love it. It's chaos over here.
Yes, it's great. It's
on
great. It's
the
just what we
rankings.
wanted.
And Billy Joel to me is there. And it's like, oh, I
know.
love that too. I know. It's like, oh my goodness. Oh. You know what? No, you know what? You know what? I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna take it back.
Oh.
No, I'm not gonna take it back. I'm leaving. All right.
All right. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. I know that there is probably a laundry list of stuff that you've got coming up. This episode is going to come out in the middle of April. Is there anything you want to plug that's on the horizon for our listeners to check out?
Yeah, you know what? I'll just say, I love conversations like this, and if you have any interest in movies, good or bad, I have a podcast for either one. The good one I host with Amy Nicholson, who's a New York Times film critic. It's called Unspooled. We get deep into what makes movies good, if they're good, and we'll go everywhere from like Magic Mike to Citizen Kane. There's no rhyme or reason. It's like we'll kind of dig into all of it. Surprisingly, I'm not a big fan of Shawshank Redemption, so you can get after me for that.
Yeah.
And then of course there's How Did This Get Made, which I co-host with Jason Mantzoukas and June Diane Brayfield, where we just talk about the best of the worst movies ever made. So you can find them wherever you get your podcasts.
They're both
Awesome.
absolutely fantastic. I still think How Did This Get Made is still the gold standard of comedy podcasts in
you're
this
so
world.
nice to say it.
So we are honored to have you, Paul. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank
Seriously.
you so much.
You're listening to the Geekscape Network.